On today's episode of the University Debate, we'll be talking about two important topics. China and Africa, this is an empire or a partner. Global impact, who decides what it means and for whom. I remain your host, Evan Sugochukwu. And to do justice to the topics I mentioned, I have with me my two young friends, Shalom from the University of Jos and also a student of geology. John from the University of Jos, studying English and Literary Studies. Shalom, what do you think?
The presence of China in Africa is definitely a symbiotic tie. It is a partnership where both parties give and take from the people. Do you know that tech companies like Infinix, Techno, Vivo are brands that are sponsored and advanced by Chinese-owned companies? Just imagine where we would be without these companies in the tech world and in Africa.
Fair point. Thank you.
Um, a partnership is when both parties involved in that transaction or deal benefit equally from the transaction they are both involved in. But when one party gets to benefit more than the other, then it is not a partnership, it is unfair. And I think that is the current situation concerning the relations between Africa and China. The relationship tilts towards the favor of Chinese companies, while Africa gets to be exploited by these outside and foreign agents.
To some extent, I agree with both parties, but I'm supposed to be neutral here. So, for the next couple of minutes, I hope you stay tuned and listen to Shalom buttress her points as well as John. So, Shalom, can you shed more light on what you said earlier on?
So I don't think there's any exploitation because both parties win. Now, coming to the tech world, China have an advancement in technology and in education, and they use the knowledge they have to create gadgets, equipment that Africa is using various aspects in education, in construction, in engineering. They use their expertise knowledge to create gadgets that we use. Look at the phones and other gadgets. You could use them to do a whole lot and benefit yourself. And Africans have benefited from this, so I see no exploitation in this in this
I
world.
understand. I get you. So, your major talking points or arguments lie on the fact that, in some ways, in terms
Yes,
of technology at least, China has been very much beneficial to Africa.
yes.
Again, fair enough. John, what do you think?
I think we need to consider the basis on which this relationship is built. It is not um, meant that China keeps building these technologies while Africa is benefiting. The relationship is supposed to enable Africans to get to that position where they are able to produce their own technologies and China also benefits from it. And then it's also key to note that where do they get the resources, the raw materials they use to make this um, technologies and gadgets. Let's take Congo for example, who have rich enriched with resource like cobalt using lithium batteries. China goes into this nation, extract these resources at quite a cheap rate.
Mm.
They take it to their nation, they manufacture, they refine, and then they use it to make gadgets, of course, and then they pump it back into these same nations from which they extracted it at inflated prices, and you note that this creates a very large trade imbalance whereby these nations get enriched while the very source of those raw materials gets poorer and poorer. So that is one of the reasons why I feel the relationship is not unfair.
Do you have a point to counter what you said?
Yes. Now see why I say it's a partnership. It's rather unfortunate that African countries haven't advanced to the level where they can produce this themselves, which is a deficit on their part. Now, the partnership comes in this way. If these African countries are left with these natural resources, they won't be able to process them and bring out the very best from these resources. So, African countries provide the raw materials, while these foreign countries like China process them and then bring out the advanced products. And then we now use, so like Congo produce the raw materials, China process it, and then they provide it to not just only Africa, to the universities. So if these natural resources are left just to Congo and other African countries, we won't get the batteries and other materials we use because these resources left where they are won't amount to much.
Again, I see where she's coming from, really. That at the end of the day, before China came to Africa, these resources were there. What did they do
So
with them? So,
so Africans need Chinese and China needs Africa.
do you still believe that China is an empire based on what she said, because she's basically punctual some of the things you said. So to further buttress your point, I'd like you to shed more light on what you said, because you can look at it this way, right? At the end of the day, China is, even if it claims to be communist, it has some capitalist elements. And if the host governments or host countries do not have strong laws to protect the local citizens from exploitation, I don't think that's the fault of China to say. I'm not trying to side her, I'm just saying based off what's on ground. So I'm saying if you genuinely feel that China is indeed an empire, do you think it's their fault that the local countries or local entities, irrespective of the any of the Congo aside, any other African nation, do you think it's the fault of China that these countries don't have strong laws that protect themselves from sheer exploitation? Because your major argument is that there's trade imbalance and some level of exploitation. So what would you say really if you genuinely think that it's a case of exploitation?
Well, the world is at this level where trade policies are not just decided by nations independently. They
Right?
are being decided at global levels. We have organizations like the World Trade Organizations
Mm-hmm.
who play a key role in deciding trade policies, and this affects developing nations in a very, very crucial way, because if you check, there is a point where you need to create certain regulations that allow you to actually benefit from your resource and to industrialize at some point. China today is not how it was, let's say,
I
30 to
agree.
50 years
I
ago.
agree.
There was a point when this was industrialized. Now, if China should be able to see Africa as Africa as being in this position where it was some years ago, then it should trade with Africa in a way that it is able to make the most of its resources despite trade policies. Because it seems like now China is now capitalizing on those unfair trade policies to exploit Africa
Fair.
and to make of, this kind of profit that is not really fair and equitable to both parties involved in the trade.
I hear you again. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah.
Again? Yes.
It's important to know that China do not enforce their cultures or their political system on any country. And I'm glad that you mentioned that there are organizations that serve as watchdog. So China cannot fully exploit any country or nation in Africa because there are watchdogs, there are other parties that govern the affairs, that check the affairs that happen in various parts in various world. So there are watchdogs, there are organizations that also check the activities, the trade that goes on. So China does not enforce their rules, their cultures on any country they are trading.
Sorry, before John responds, if I hear you, you're referring to the World Trade Organization, which is
Yeah.
the apex body that organizes and facilitates and also in some ways observes whether trade is done in a favorable way for either of the parties involved.
Yeah.
Do you genuinely think that so far so good in terms of relationship between China and Africa, the WTO has been somewhat beneficial in terms of the policies and its outlook towards African nations?
So to a great extent, I think we have. And if there's any iota of justice, it will be from some corrupt practices, some corrupt actions that have been depicted by some African leaders.
Well, I think I should take this from the point of view saying the nature of China and African relationship is designed in such a way that China does not try to impose
Yeah.
its values and
Political
policies. They
system.
do call it no strings attached
Yeah,
to
true,
this
true,
issue,
Exactly.
right?
true.
But is that true? Is South South solidarity really what it portrays itself to be, or is there something beneath it which makes it fraudulent? Personally, and if you ask many other critics, if you also examine the mechanism of this trade, you find out that South South solidarity and no strings attached policy which they do and carry out in their relationship with Africa is not true. Most of the let me make a very clear example, taking the Belt and Road Initiative, for example,
Okay.
right, which is meant to address the infrastructural deficiency in African nations. It seems to come from a place of good intention, right? If you observe it closely, of course, they pumping their funds into African nations, they help construct infrastructure, roads, which should help Africa industrialize. But the truth is that are they really helping Africa industrialize, or are they really constructing strategic logistic networks which will help them in further exploiting and extracting the resources of Africa? We examine closely and we find out that it is true. That is actually what happens. They're not just trying to help us construct infrastructure, but they're trying to create networks that will make it easy for them to extract resources, which reflects and parallels former colonial legacy of extraction.
I think they are helping us. They are partnering with us because who decides the location of these roads, the location of these bridges? It is the Nigerian government. No Chinese company will say, okay, we will build here and it stands. There will have to be a partnership and an order that permits them to do that. So there is an order or cooperation from the Nigerian government or some structure that say, okay, do this. And I think they are helping us in the sense that whenever they sign or carry out any contracts, they ensure that they use expertise and they ensure that inferior materials are not used, unlike when some Nigerian or African companies carry out projects, they ensure that it's carried out and delivered on time and superior, the right standard of materials are used.
Well, while it is true that some African companies, construction companies, for example, are not really as efficient as they should be, that doesn't mean that all African companies are not efficient. There are actually very, very efficient African companies, which is the reason why we have some of the infrastructure we have today. And I think that point you make actually even shows how exploitative the nature of that relationship is. How will I give you a loan and then demand that you have to use that loan to buy something from my shop? That simply means that you don't want that whatever you are giving me to actually benefit me, and that is the nature of the relationship. Because okay, China decides to fund a project, let's say railroads, for example, in Nigeria,
Right?
yes, and then what do?
For
They
Nigerians.
contract,
She says for Nigerians.
Yeah,
well, let's say for Nigerians,
it
that
is
is
for
that is
Nigerians.
what they say they will do, right? Construct railroads for Nigeria, right? And then they contract this project of constructing railroads not to an African company, but to Chinese companies. You see,
Mhm.
so the money is now leaving a Chinese pocket and going back to a Chinese pocket. And then what is even funnier, they now still hire Chinese laborers to carry out this contract. What does it do? The implication is that it limits skill transfer. If Chinese companies are truly more expertise than Nigerian companies, then if they are in a fair relationship, then they should try to share their expertise so that Africa will get to their level of expertise. But by isolating African laborers, they now hinder skill transfer between these two parties, and in a way it keeps Africa in the position it has been for years.
Now, African labor force are not totally sidelined. Now, the reason why some of these materials are gotten from Chinese companies is to maintain the standard. Now, when you look at the labor force in a ratio of 100, not all the people who work are from China. Putting it in a percentage, I'll say a 10 to 90%, they only bring the very most important expertise, probably the engineer or the contractor, while other members are Nigerians. And most times, these companies don't just come work and go, they also train the Nigerians that work alongside with them. So any Nigerian who work with them don't just leave with their pay, but they gain a thing or two as they work with this Chinese company.
She's raised valid points. I to some extent I agree with the fact that maybe top hierarchy might be Chinese,
To
but
maintain the standard.
again
Yeah.
she feels that Chinese persons and their approach towards efficiency.
Their exposure and their level of education and technology too.
So, based on what you are saying, are you saying that there are no qualified individuals in Nigeria who can be at this top
I'm
hierarchy?
not saying there are
It is untrue. There are
no,
actually
but
qualified individuals who can be part of that top hierarchy. But what they try to do is marginalize these individuals so that they can work this project to benefit them. I happen to work with this mining company at some point in my life, and this is actual brutal reality of Chinese activities in the mining sector of Nigeria. For example, the laborers and the people extracting these resources supplied to Chinese hardly benefit anything. They get petty payment. What they get as wage daily is not even enough to sustain them. for their daily families, while these people who actually get the resources are paid in millions of naira. So it kind of creates this parallel economy where the Chinese in Nigeria benefit the lion's share of Nigerian resources,
Mm.
while Nigerians who actually do the hard labor and backbreaking jobs hardly have enough to fend for themselves. Can we say that this is fair? Can we say that this is equal partnership?
So when you work with that company, what level of training do you have? So these Chinese companies, they don't just bring people around. They ensure that the people they bring are people that are trained, people who have passed through various technological processes, and they are well and skilled trained. They don't just pick students or pick those who have 1 year of experience. They ensure that those people they are bringing have the experience, have gone through the exposure, have know how to use very materials of various technologies. So we are not just looking at just the pay, we are looking at the level of training to ensure that they carry out projects that do not just crumble in the next one
Well,
or 2 years.
I think
So I'm looking at the level of education, training, and technology.
I think if they really want African workers to benefit, then they could actually train African workers to get to their level of expertise within Africa.
But they are,
But do they carry such training programs? No, they
the
don't. What
Chinese
they
do
do
not
is
have
they
the
con-
job to train your
they
workers.
they
Yes.
should, because they benefit from our economy. Then it is their job to make sure that the people they benefit from also benefit. And
Nigerians,
also I think you
okay.
should consider the nature of these companies. These companies actually do the Chinese actually come to build refineries within Nigeria?
If they are giving the
No.
contracts, they will do it.
What the companies do is they basically extract, they refine, and they take the raw materials to Chinese to refine. Why don't they bring these refineries to Nigeria so that the Nigeria can also refine, and in a way this even aids the industrial process of Nigeria, the
True, true,
industrialization
true. process.
process, but they don't. The nature of the company is just extracting, just show you the mentality behind the orientation. We are only here to extract your resources, take to our nation, refine it, and sell the product from your resources at inflated prices. And I think it is not right.
I believe that is not the mentality behind it. If there are issues, corrupt issues or any other issues or biases in the Nigerian system, these issues are why these companies might not want to fully base their companies there. So there could be issues in the system, in the leadership system, in the educational system that could be there. And I believe if any of these companies are given the contracts by the government to do this, and if there are policies by the Nigerian government that insist that they do it this way, they will definitely do it. So they cannot do everything for Nigeria. That's why it is a partnership. You don't expect Chinese companies to do everything for you. It's a partnership. You give this, I give this, you take this, and you take this. So it is a partnership. We shouldn't expect them to do everything for us because they are building bridges or doing other things. No, it should be a partnership, meaning both parties should contribute and both parties should take from the table.
Thank you, thank you. You still have anything to say to her?
Well, I think also we should examine the reality of this relationship so far. China has been in relationship with Africa for long now. What has been the result of this partnership, the so-called partnership between the East?
Good
It
word.
has led to debt and debt and debt and accruing debt. It has gotten to the point that most African nations feel like they can't even pay this debt. Take Congo, for example. And what happens at the end of this? Before you get to diplomacy, because at the end, they leverage on this creditor power to make this nation succeed their right to their resources
True.
and strategic assets. We have this example of this Hambatona port in Sri Lanka, which the Chinese had to take because they have loaned them money and they couldn't pay. So can you see the actual reality of this relationship? If China had been in true partnership with Africa, then Africa truly would have accumulated so much debt. At this level, there should have been a certain level of progress. But what is progress? Is progress accruing debt? I don't think that is progress.
If African countries can't pay their debts, that's going to be the fault of China. If he loans me money and I can't pay, I won't blame him. So African countries should have systems and structures to be able to pay off their debts rather than blaming the countries that are giving them aid and helping them. So if there are issues within the system, those issues should be addressed and not blaming the countries that are helping us. So if there are issues in settling these debts, why collect a debt that you can't now? This is where corruption sometimes come in. When these loans, this amount, this structure, these things are given, they are not properly appropriated. You get
True.
so paying back becomes an issue. So if there's an issue with payment of debt, China isn't at fault.
Okay, it's been university debate, and like I said, I have with me two smart individuals, and I'm sure you'd agree with me that you've done justice to the topic. Take a quick break now. When we're done with the break, we'll be back to further buttress the points made by Shalom as well as John. What I can take from both takes is the fact that Shalom genuinely believes that it's a partnership, and that's her take. You can agree to or disagree. John, on the other hand, thinks that the relationship has been very much exploitative. I kind of agree with both takes. I think to some extent, to a large extent, that is, both arguments have a lot of merit. Till we're back, I remain Evans Richmond. Welcome back, guys. It's still University Debate. On to our next topic, we'll be discussing who decides what global impact means and for whom. Sequel to what we did in the last topic, Shalom and of course John will do absolute justice to the previous topic. So I'll go first with Shalom. Now, what do you think?
It's global impact, so I believe people in different parts of the world should be involved in this decision and in this process. I don't believe that a global few or elites should make this decision, and if they should, these decisions and this process should reflect the interest of people at the grassroots.
Oh, thank you. John,
Well, while global impact should ideally be shaped by the interplay of different groups of people, civil societies, different institutions, governments, the actual reality is that it often reflects the priorities and values of a few global, of a few elite cycles of people. By elite, I mean it often reflects the priority of wealthy nations, um, powerful multinational corporations, and most of the constituents that are meant to be represented are often marginalized, and that is not right.
okay, and thank you. So again, if I hear you clearly, you're saying that global impact or the meaning of global impact rather is usually shaped by specifically wealthy nations, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And Shalom, you on the other hand, what do you think?
I think that global impact should be shaped by people from the grassroots.
You think,
Yeah,
but as you speak,
it's rather unfortunate that the states or
okay,
people at the grassroots are not perfectly represented by the global impact.
thank you. So again, back to you, John. Who exactly is the global impact for? You've answered the question of who decides what it means. So the next question will be for whom? Who are these persons that will be dependent on the meaning of this said global impact?
Well, global impact is meant to have a ripple effect. That is to say, it affects every single individual on planet Earth. I'll give a very common example. If there should be an outbreak of a disease, let's say the COVID-19 syndrome, which happened, I think, was in 2020, it
Yeah.
affected almost every part of the planet.
Okay.
So it usually should affect everybody, but then there is a scenario whereby the decisions made by a few powerful key actors in shaping global impact actually affects everybody, but then it happens in a way that the benefits goes to a certain sector of people, while the brunt, the negative effects actually affect some people. Let me paint a scenario here. Let's take multinational corporations like the IMF, right, the International Monetary Fund. It is meant to have every single part of the world, every country, every nation fairly represented, right?
Yeah.
But is there actually fair representation? No. Research has shown that 16% of the votes in corporations like the IMF and World Bank is owned by the US alone. So can
Mm.
you imagine why the global south in general owns less than 50% of the vote? So you can see that already the US now has a veto power in major
True.
decision making. And what happens? They usually make policies that benefit them or reflect their priorities, and then not even reflecting the priorities of other people like the global south, for example.
Thank you, John. Shalom, any rebuttal to that?
It's rather unfortunate that these decisions are taken by the global elite. I think if it's possible, we need to take steps to see that people at the grassroots from every nation, every tribe are properly represented in these unions and in these communities they should be represented among and with the global elites so that the decisions they take should represent what is happening, the effects
True.
that is being played at the grassroots. And this could happen if we could start from the grassroots when communities meet at a town hall and deliberate what are issues affecting us, and then they tell it to their leaders, and their leaders should ensure that they reflect what is happening at the grassroots to the leaders ahead, and it's like a ladder, it goes up, and then these people should ensure that they do not present their own interests, but that they represent the interests of the people at the grassroots because it is global for a reason. So it should have global interest
Representation,
and
yes.
it should also represent the problem at the roots, at the grassroots.
Thank you. And you've both done justice to. I say insist that we're not touching so much on the for whom part of the question. We would all agree that global impact is decided by certain specific actors for a host and myriad of reasons, from the level of influence and wealth these nations possess. But I also think we should touch more on the for whom part of that question. And the reason why I say that is so that for a problem to be solved, it needs to be properly diagnosed. And without that proper diagnosis, it is impossible to solve any problem. So if we can clearly state who global impact is really created for, the recipients, when I use that word, then we can actually not only talk about the benefits but also the demerits. And once we clearly talk about the demerits, then we can actually prepare solutions to what the problem is.
Yeah. Well, it would be biased to say that the benefits of global impacts actually only go to these elite few,
Okay?
right? But then it will also be untrue to say that the negative effects um also only affect them. The truth is that global impacts actually do affect all people, but in most cases, it reflects the priority of this elite. So for whom it is actually for them, let me paint this scenario. There's this famous quote people usually say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
True?
So I remember watching this documentary on YouTube. It was actually a TED Talk video where this woman was saying how she observed the level of devastation in Afghanistan, and she wanted to do something to change it, right? And that's one of the issues of global impact, foreign aid, right? So she wrote a proposal and gave it to this multinational corporation to suggest that they built clinics to address the health issue in this war-torn country. And at the end of the day, what did they do? They felt, no, we are not doing this. Rather, we want you to write this proposal, and this time it should be that we want to build schools. So the question for whom does it actually reflect the problems of these people?
True.
It does not actually reflect their
Reflects, yeah.
problem. Rather, it reflects the values, what these people giving the foreign aid feel should be done. So if you ask me for whom, it should be for all people, but often it is for
For
the
them, yeah,
powerful.
the donors, yeah. You also agree with him?
Yeah, it's rather unfortunate that those who benefit are the elite. As I said earlier, if the decision making to start from the grassroots, and then the benefit should also come to those at the grassroots.
Mm.
It will go a long way. Now, have it in mind that the issues in Ghana won't be the same as the issues in Nigeria, and the issues in Senegal will be the same with the issues in Congo.
True.
So, having that in mind, it will help us after the decision making. It helps us to bring out solutions that are suitable to these nations, not just because every solution won't just work in any nation just like that. There are solutions that are suitable, just as we know that the problems differ from one nation to the other.
Yes.
It could be insecurity, it could be health, it could be early marriage. It could be, the problems differ. Those are the problems differ. So solutions also differ, and that is why it is important that as members of the grassroots asked and solutions are brought, these decisions should be reflected to the global elite.
Thank you very much. I think Shalom has given us quite. She's coming from the standpoint of what should be ideally, and which is what most of us in quote unquote African nations and other parts of the third world would actually hope for. But it's unfortunate that the world doesn't work on idealism. In any case, our points are very much valid, and we hope that solutions she's preferred actually take effect. My dear friend John, on the other hand, has proven to be a very practical person and has also, in his quite eloquent manner, presented points that paint the stark reality in the world as we see it today. We would go further into this with their closing remarks. But before then, I also hope that everyone listening to us would not just see this as a podcast, but as an event that's going to be running, and that event will lead to genuine changes in our society. I hope that these conversations graduate from where we're currently sat to real life scenarios where changes are totally effective. John, do you have any closing remarks?
Well, I just feel that the, there should be a democratization of global representation, the way that all key players in shaping um, the issues that impact us globally actually benefit, share in the brunt and also in the benefits. I think it doesn't go beyond that. If there is equality, if there is justice, then whatever happens globally should benefit us and we should also share in the good. And that means that it is a fair world. But in a system where a few benefit and others don't actually benefit, then we should question what we really say is global impact and what we say is fair representation at the global level.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Shalom.
It's global for a reason. And I hope that our listeners and any other person, if you get the chance to stand and be among the global elites, that you represent the heart and the interest of the people at the conference.
Thank you guys once again. I remain your host, Evan Sudochukwu. It's been a university debate, and I hope that the conversations we've had here, like I said earlier on, translate to real life solutions. We're not just part of Africa, but we're part of the world, and we expect you to also play a role. Thank you guys once again, and I will see you next week. God bless.